Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mindprint Hash for week 13 of 2026. As always, I'm your host, Cameron Otsuka, and with me here as co-host is Matt Dines. Really interesting episode today. Matt is going to go through, take us through kind of what is going on with some of the Iran action and the hyperinflation that we've been seeing in Iran. And, in his kind of framework, he views the purpose of all of this action to bump and shift Iran from an IRGC-led private equity, private military regime towards a civilian regime while trying to maintain the same order. So as we go through that, and as I flip us over to our discussion slides here, we're going to first take a little pit stop and talk about where Iran is at in terms of hyperinflation and just inflation generally, compare that to history a little bit. And then we're going to go into some comparisons of IRGC versus the central bank of Iran. And I know Matt's got a lot of really interesting comparisons there. And then finally, some of Iran's foreign integrations. And he's got a final takeaway for all of us coming out of this on what to expect next coming out of this armed conflict. So with some of that table setting done, Matt, I want to flip it over to you. Just kick us off here a little bit. What are these three probable outcomes that are, in your mind, and how does that kind of shape how you view the action going on in Iran?
So, quick background, because the governance structure in Iran is not something that most kind of Western audience members will be able to readily foot their own experience to, because our own government structure, our own financial structure, does quietly have these kind of same dynamics or problems under the hood, but it's not as front and center and pressing as the situation that's on the ground in Iran today. So when I say Iran, there's two separate things, actually, two separate power factions. There's a civilian kind of governance order. Think about how we have in the U.S. An executive branch, legislative, judicial, etc., and then military control runs up and through the executive branch, with the president wearing the dual hats as commander in chief, as all of us learned in our grade school civics classes, or most of us. And then you've got a financial structure that's attached to it, which is quasi-independent. And this is what we got into that discussion last week about central bank independence. The central bank doesn't map onto the governance structure. It is its own separate thing, which in reality means it is not accountable to this whole chain of command that the public sector is running on, and also the military. Now, in Iran, it is totally different, right? You had a religious revolution in 1979, which overthrew a kind of a secular government under the Shah, right? With the Shah as the ultimate authority, kind of like a dynasty type of framework. But you had a scenario where, because in this situation where you have a complete reversal, or a complete new government being installed, replacing an older government, there is a huge risk that everybody knows about in these situations where it's night of a thousand knives.
Yeah.
The legacy, or the new rulers, don't trust the existing military, because that's when you get couped. So a lot of this framework that's built up in Iran, and we'll talk about two different competing regimes in Iran. In reality, there's probably much more than that. It's much more complicated. But what the Ayatollah Khomeini did in terms of formalizing this Islamic Republic was he created his own branch of like a private militia, and this is the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is separate from the civilian military, or the military that responds up to the civilian authority, to the executive, which is smaller in nature, which was kind of the legacy military that came over from the Shah. So because they were worried about, loyalists, insurrection, etc., you had two separate militaries, and this existing, or the new military was completely unaccountable in a separate chain of command, essentially. I'm gonna
Continue.
cut this short, keep it succinct. But essentially what happened over the course of 40 to 50 years, from 1979 to 2026, is this paramilitary gradually built up power. So you can think of it as like a private military contractor organization, starting out like something like Blackwater in the U.S., which changed names multiple times, all that stuff. But then it began as, you started going through the 80s, the Iran-Iraq War. You get into the 90s, the reconstruction and development contracts as we, kind of entered pseudo peacetime in the Middle East for a brief window. You started to see the IRGC start to build out businesses, and it starts to slowly build up this empire. So it looks like a private equity shop, if you will. It's got infrastructure development, like no bid contract agreements with the that it holds with the secular with the not secular government, but like the civilian government. Um, Oil and gas development projects, pipelines, information technology, cybersecurity, you name it, it has a piece of this pie. So it starts to look like this hybrid of like a private equity firm and a private paramilitary firm that doesn't report to anybody. So it ends up being like this kind of untamable beast that ultimately takes over the governance authority of the Iranian economy itself. And that's the situation that's built up over the last 20 to 30 years as this thing has just compounded, right, and become more and more controlling of the Iranian government, finance, and military itself. So, in my view, that's what this military action is actually about. Is this situation has come to its head, and we're at that fork in the road where we got to go one of three directions here. So on one side, you've got the IRGC kind of faction of Iranian life, if you will, or the economy, um, which controls government, controls military. It is the power structure that we're actually at war with. So when you see a headline that says Trump attacks, Iran, drops by Israel attacks Iran, this leader's taken out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What they're really saying is they're actually going after this private equity paramilitary group, and they're trying to cut that thing out. They don't want to do a full regime change like we saw in, let's say, Iraq, where we say, oh, Saddam Hussein, Ba'athist government, you're out. Now we're going to try to install a new operating system and bring a democratic framework to Iraq. That just ends in disaster, right? We learned that that's kind of failed state dynamics. Same thing we did with Afghanistan in the region. Replace the Taliban, try to put some new civilian government in place. It doesn't work. So I think the actual lift and shift here, Cameron, that you got to is the end goal of this military action is neuter, decapitate the IRGC and its control over the Iranian government. That branch will just be 86th. It'll be dead, assuming that this action that the U.S., Israel, and there's quiet partners under the scene who are announcing themselves, and we'll get to them in a second as the end game. That's path A in terms of how this thing resolves itself. You'll see an IRGC out of the picture, and the existing civilian branch, the executive government, could take over the reins of governing and operating the economy of Iran. But it will not be a new government. It'll just be a continuation, right? And slowly that thing will morph into something that looks more palatable to the six GCC nations. I think this is the key. And then also China as it looks to extend in the Belt and Road Initiative and integrate Iran into the Asian growth economy. So that's path one of the exit. That's what the White House would like to see. That's the direction, in my view, that makes sense and is aligned with the national security strategy document that was released in December. The other route is this military operation fails. It doesn't root out the IRGC. That looks like a status quo for this private equity shop. And it has customers throughout the world that it works with in the global, offshore dollar-based financial system that we talk about. So that's path two. Just steady state, muddle along, and then path three is the kind of the worst outcome for everybody. This is what the GCC countries are expressly worried about: is the failed state scenario where you see this neighbor, which is kind of another order of magnitude bigger than Iraq and Afghanistan, turning into just kind of an ungovernable region which would take decades to clean up and a lot of resources to put back together. So that's kind of the dynamic here. That's why this is going on. The key reason is we talked about this a few weeks ago. Iran is just the key, a mission critical piece of real estate for global trade, the economy. It's tough for it to kind of organize and defend itself as a sovereign. So it has to be aligned with someone. And the key thing we're fighting over now is who is this piece of ground going to be aligned with? There's certain checks and balances that, you know, party A doesn't see party B as a viable option. Same thing, B does not see A. And I think the end game here is a new scenario where the U.S. comes in as the owner operator of the financial nexus, that is the Strait of Hormuz. It would look like, so think about these big actions in military history: Spanish Armada, the Opium Wars, etc., where you saw the old British Empire take control of, let's say, a key bottleneck like Strait of Gibraltar or Hong Kong, etc. These things play out in terms of like a new financial power taking control of a key choke point. I think the answer here, what we're looking at, is the Strait of Hormuz, or the whole Persian Gulf, effectively transferring over its purveyor away from the old British Empire and towards the new American-led faction. And the partners behind the scenes, this isn't a U.S. and Israel action. I think it makes more sense to think about the end game result that actually provides a steady state. U.S. takes over as the purveyor from the financial aspect as the intermediary. GCC takes over as the equity owner of Iran and capitalizes the redevelopment and provides the risk capital into the game. So they become the new private equity shop, as opposed to the IRGC, which is just a quasi-military front masquerading as a large fraction of the economy. And then China comes in as the build-out capital to build out the integration into this Belt and Road Initiative that's been ongoing and developing for the last 1 to 2 decades. So that's the steady state. That's what the White House is kind of pushing towards the end game. You've got another party who wants to see the status quo maintain itself, right? Kind of British occupied ownership or European-led globalist capital maintaining control over this key bottleneck. The status quo can't hold, though, is the thing. So one way or the other, like same way British Empire came into conflict, the upstart came into conflict with Spanish Empire at the English Channel in 1588. This is one of those things, and similar like major moments in history, and this will determine how the next, more so than decades, possibly centuries, kind of play out. So huge thing we're living through right now. And I think the big signal right now, what's going on as we're in, social media reports don't give you a good picture at all of what's going on. This headline that we saw, I think it was Sunday evening, Iran printed a 10 million rial banknote. The largest denominated bill was a 1 million rial banknote. That was 2022. If you do the growth rates on hyperinflation, you're looking at like 115% annualized growth rates in terms of inflation in the Iranian economy. So this is wartime. In wartime, you kind of assume that the existing power structure will consume all possible resources, all capacity in the economy, labor, resources, et cetera, to try to survive. So you cannot really fund growth during wartime. It doesn't work that way. You've also got a situation where the government can't raise taxes, just given the maximum sanctions pressure that has been levied by the United States through OFAC. The government can't borrow externally, also because of the sanctions that prohibit its involvement in international capital markets. That's still going on, however, through illicit activities. We'll get into that. It can't draw on foreign reserves because it doesn't have any, right? There's no trade, so it's not making money, at least above the board, that it can report. And so the only remaining government to get the resources it needs to try to survive, and when I say government here, it's this paramilitary private equity shop called the IRGC, is what it boils down to. The only way it can do that is to increase money supply through printing. And in this case, printing means you add zeros on the bills and you print more of them. So we don't know quantity, right? There's no Fred like we have in the U.S. Where we can go to and get a time series on the amount of bills in circulation like we can for the Fed's dollar banknotes. But this print is your signal for how this war is going. This is suggesting that the existing kind of status quo power is at this stage where this is the last resort. It has to push on.
And how much further can this actually go, right? I mean, when I see 10 million reals, I mean, are we talking next step is 100 million? You know, how does this kind of slot in versus what we've seen in the past?
Yeah. Short answer, we don't know. The collapse can come at any time, but when I say collapse, like a currency collapse, but you can always add another zero, right? And we've seen this in history before. I've just got a slide here where we lay out based on orders of magnitude, different money printing. But essentially what you do, you see the red bills, the 1 million real note with the oil refinery printed. It's like a blue tent. And then you got the new one, the 10 million real note. They shifted over. They're in the millions now, and they just did a 10x, right? Next one, like, don't be surprised if, it could be weeks, it could be, I mean, it could be any day now, right? You get the 100 million real note printed, but they can keep doing that for a time, so long as, people just and supplying the government with resources. But you can move, like, there's 7 more orders of magnitude that we've seen other economies go through during hyperinflations. The German mark, the Zimbabwe $100 trillion note. So this can go on quite a while. So money printing Hall of Fame here. I talked about, we got the 100 trillion note that the German mark hit in 1924. Zimbabwe 2009 also hit that level. You've got similar 500 billion in Yugoslavia in 1993. The all-time highest is actually 100 quintillion, which is just just a goofy amount of paper of money. Yeah, that Hungary hit in 1946. My point is, this could last a little bit longer, but it's kind of one of those things that escalates and will build on itself. The further or like the tighter the boundary is on the resources available for the existing governing authority to tap into, right? So the more pressure you put on it, the higher that number will go. And the fact that we just saw the number go from a 1 million to a 10 million tells you that the squeeze is on, right?
And so I want to switch
the
gears a little bit
IRGC
there,
is,
Matt,
yeah.
on, so I understand now, like, a lot better, hyperinflation, kind of where the squeeze is happening. But then you also mentioned, kind of in your initial intro, that there's a difference between how the IRGC operates versus the Central Bank of Iran, right? And last week's episode, we did touch on central bank independence and kind of your definition, your framework around that. And so how does that apply to the comparisons there?
Yep. So, and we talked about central bank independence as a sliding scale, right? You can go from, let's say, 0 to 100. 100 implies that your central bank is not beholden to any external authority, whether it's public, private, et cetera, right? The European Central Bank is probably the closest thing to that. Dial that up to 100. The opposite of that would be if your central bank is just a bank that tucks into the existing kind of executive branch of government, or just the government itself, and is fully beholden to the public sector. So in the U.S., that would be like a Fed that is subordinate to the U.S. Treasury. It's not the way our system works. That's, we hear the kicking and screaming about that topic specifically in the media. leave that aside. We'll probably be talking about that more and more in the
In the
coming
future.
weeks
Yeah.
as the Warsh nomination comes up. Um, but within the Iranian structure, the central bank is actually beholden to the government, the existing the civilian government, and reports to the executive branch, right? And so its mandate isn't really price stability, as you're saying, like it prints $10 million rial notes, right? So that's the like if you had a price stability mandate, that would be in conflict. Its mandate is really to fund the government, um, which is at the end of the day every central bank's kind of backstop, um, or final mandate, right? Ensure the continuity and survival of government. So the central bank has to purchase Iranian government debt to fund its budget, which it comes up with through its own kind of legislative process. And so it's basically required, gun to its head, to fund everything the government needs to purchase that it says it requires to wage this. It would argue a defensive war, right?
Right.
Against a foreign hostile takeover. You know, as in all wars, like
From their
there's
perspective.
nuance, and
Yeah.
both sides have a perspective
Yeah.
here, right? So, Central Bank of Iran, fully subordinate to that. It's a civilian government branch, but where the rubber kind of practically meets the road in the real economy, right? We've talked about how the IRGC has slowly over the decades just amassed ownership of all of these key entities in the Iranian economy. It's oil and gas, the pipeline infrastructure, cybersecurity, what construction and infrastructure development. Like that's it's your only game in town, and it has exclusivity essentially. It's got no bid contracts, all of that stuff. So what it's actually doing is funding this IRGC private equity, private military war machine, right? And it's totally beholden to that. So it's captive of the civilian government, which is itself captive of this private paramilitary financialist blob, right? That is what the IRGC has become. Um, I think is that a good explainer how deep we can leave it? Here's a little
Yeah.
bit from the Middle East Institute that explains kind of the ownership and goes into detail of the IRGC and its front companies or just
What
fully
else
owned
they're involved
subsidiaries
in.
that
Yeah.
operate in the economy. Yep.
And I think I
Port and
want to
mine
better
development, all
understand
that.
then, like,
Yeah.
how does this all expand out into these, I understand that they have different front companies, let's call them, ways that they're funding themselves, but where does this all connect to, right? There has to be some other side to the trade to be able to fund them with the dollars or the whatever currency that they're making these purchases in. So how does this actually connect to ex Iran countries?
Yep. Yep. So the U.S. government, since I mean, I would say at least 26 since Trump administration won 45, right? Um, they have been going through and trying to map this network. How are they doing it? How do they finance themselves? Who do they involve? Who do they face as counterparties? How do they access international capital markets, right? So this U.S. order, or the American Sovereigntist faction, as we call them, has been going through this process for the last, let's say, 10 years, right? And you can see this if you go to the, there's U.S. government website here. There's rewards, tips up to $15 million to map out this infrastructure, the oil for money trade, front companies engaged in international activity, how the IRGC is transferring funds and materials to its terrorist and militia proxies and partners that are operating, across the Middle East, right? We know Hezbollah as a proxy, the Houthis, right, in Yemen, et cetera. But then also, like, it shows up internationally as well. They're in Venezuela, like it's a global, it's a private equity operation that runs globally, right? So the Treasury itself, if you think about the American public sector trying to uh, take on its own accountability and speak for itself here, and this this kind of global exercise, uh, it is going after this thing and mapping it out. And what we found out in the last kind of 5 to 10 years, but increasingly accelerating under um, the last year, like since the Trump 47th administration started in 2025, has really been making progress on those results, right? So the noose is tightening as we get closer and closer to this this big historical event, right? That is happening in real time. So I want to roll us back to the first stage in this operation, right? We think about this kind of war starting in February 28th, right? A few weeks ago. I'd argue it's been going on. It's been building to a crescendo for like a decade at least at this point. But even specifically, like the first action in this epoch, I'd say was June, right? When we bombed the three nuclear development facilities, Fordow, Natanz, et cetera.
Yep.
But also quietly behind the scenes at that standpoint, the headline that went less noticed was this hit on Iran's major crypto exchange, Natixis, I believe, right? Do I have that name right, Cameron?
Novitex, I think, but yeah.
Novitex.
Yep.
Natixis, this different company, strike that from a record. Novitex. Basically, it was hacked. Just think of this as a military cybersecurity exercise. This was a capital pull away. So you saw Bitcoin, 90 million Bitcoin leave the number one Iranian crypto exchange. So you're pulling out essentially. Think of that as removing the equity layer of your key financial intermediary, and that thing leads to a struggle and a collapse. Right. So that first exercise in June was the opening bid. You're softening up your target. And I think what happened, as we talk about the Bitcoin bear market really starting in August, the Iran action, like this is such a big development and geopolitical history over the last, and like think about it in 100-year, 500-year type of terms. The Bitcoin exit liquidity that started with this hack in June, like that got everybody involved to realize, oh, this is a rush for liquidity. Like they're coming for us. So they start this process of, I guess, arming up, liquefying, getting all the resources they need as they realize, like, oh, it's battle time, man your stations. So that's when the liquidity taking starts in my mind. And you really start to see what is this Bitcoin drawdown itself is actually like the mirror image that's produced by this geopolitical, the military action in Iran, if that makes sense. They are correlated, they are tied, they are like they are causal of each other, right? So step two, you look at March 3rd, 2026, just to stick to the Bitcoin theme, the Iran crypto outflows, and what does everybody care about, right? It's got to be dollar stable coins, but then also Bitcoin, right? Forbes reports Iran crypto outflows surged 700% as the airstrikes hit Tehran on March 2nd, right? So what's happening? The Bitcoin, stable coins, et cetera, that capital is leaving Iran, and you presume like some of that is capital flight, like if you can get across the borders, leave, et cetera. Okay, but that wouldn't show up.
Yeah.
That wouldn't show up on chain, right? If you're just holding private keys, you're walking across the border. That's not a transaction. This is like actual measured transaction. Capital is going outside the borders. You got to assume there's something else coming in, right? Could be arms, resources, humans, et cetera. But it's all part of this process that this big picture thing that's happening, right? So where is it going? January 2026, you saw this is from the U.S. Treasury. Two exchanges, ZSEX and ZCon, two UK registered digital asset exchanges, were designated as IRGC-linked digital asset exchanges who were funding these transactions. Where do they trace back? The UK. So you start to see there is this, who is the financial partner of, who is the counterparty of this private equity paramilitary group we call the IRGC, who is the actual target of this U.S. kind of led military action. Oh my God, it traces back to Europe, right? And it's right out there in the open at this point. See the Guardian article, Lloyd's and Santander accused of providing accounts for Iranian front companies. The second one, this is a blog, London's dirty secret, how stolen regime funds flow through the UK. Third one, over 200 million pounds in London property tied to IRGC individuals. And this includes the headline, we didn't show this one, but Ayatollah Khamenei's son, who has become the new supreme leader, Mujtaba, right? They list this, $200 million mansion in London. So it's starting to look really bad here for Europe, right? The supposed partners in the Western Atlanticist, post-war coalition, and you start to see like where the split is taking place, right? Those two outcomes we talked about that ignore the failed state outcome that I would hope everybody wants to avoid, because that's going to be awful from the human losses standpoint. But you see the status quo pathway where IRGC stays in power. Who would want them to stay in power? Well, they're business partners here. Their other side, their financial counterparties who are making money off of the existing business of this paramilitary shop taking control more and more of the Iranian economy, versus the new guard in town, GIC countries, U.S., China, etc., that is kind of shaping up in real time. You go through here, honing in on the payload here. What does China have involved here? 2021, this is the Belt and Road deals. China pledged up to 400 billions in investment over 25 years for a strategic partnership for the build out of infrastructure in Iran. So this is like getting a hold of resources, oil, gas, et cetera, but also minerals, to continue to build out the kind of the Asian growth economy in a kind of China-led version of those events playing out, which some of these partners may not want to see happen. But you see a graph here cited from the China-Iran fact sheet that's been published by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as of March 16th. I got the website here. You can go look up, read this report. But essentially, all of the oil out of Iran is going towards China, right? So you see the alignment here. U.S. and China make strange bedfellows here, but you kind of see the way that this shakeout is taking place. You're starting to see which side, and the GCC countries themselves are the key swing player. It looks to me like, when you look at the final slide here, with the GCC countries poised to join this Iran action, which they kind of already are, what that would look like in the future. It's really just U.S. Or use of military bases on GCC country soil to execute these military operations. That's kind of the bigger picture of what the involvement would look like. But
Right.
they've already had missiles fired at their infrastructure, the South Pars Field in Qatar, for example. All of that, we've seen those headlines. IRGC is, I mean, almost baiting them in at this point, right? To bring this event to its head. But that's kind of the way I see this shaking up, what's actually happening. And you start to see a better picture of why this had to happen right now. It wasn't Trump made a knee-jerk decision, didn't have a plan, et cetera. No, this was something that was coming to its head over, you could say, years, decades, but probably for over a century, right? You could say at least since World War I. I could go back on the tape and make an argument for that. But yeah, this is just a kind of a shakeout that was ultimately going to happen. You hope, from the artist Sun Tzu quote, like never fight on ground prepared by your enemy. Right, so how much control did we have over time and place? U.S. couldn't, like, the action was going to take place in Persia, right? Like Alexander the Great going into Persia, et cetera. You have to go fight in Persia. But in terms of the timing and the structure of the battle, right? Well, we did these other moves ahead of time, Natanz, Fordow, et cetera, crippling the crypto rails, which all of these a lot of the financing channels was going through, right? As OFAC kind of blocked the legacy banking relationships, all of those were monitored. So you're starting to see there this isn't a Mad King type of scenario as a lot of media is presenting this, right? This is something that, in the big picture of history, we were coming to this fork in the road one way or the other, and we're in it, right? So we'll
Right.
see how this continues to play out. But in my mind, that 10 million real note is your key tell of where this thing is in the fog of war, where it's difficult to see where exactly this stands in real time.
Right. And I think that really helps me synthesize all this together. But, in your mind, Matt, what's the final takeaway here in terms of, is there something we should be looking for in terms of what the US is going to push for or next steps? What does that look like in your mind?
Yeah. So final takeaway, I'm going to build this on what we're seeing in the world bond markets, right? So your investment grade 10-year sovereign debt rates, right? And everybody's got their eye on the treasury, right? Treasury yields up. Oh, if you look at SOFR, futures right now, hey, we're actually looking at a potential hike from the Fed becoming more and more probable in late Q3 or Q4, September, October type of thing. It's up to a 40% probability as of this morning, Thursday, March 26th, of a hike, right? So everybody's got their eye on the US. What is it going to do about inflation, et cetera? I'd argue it's the opposite. Look towards the other G7 countries, uh, France, Germany, UK, Australia. These debt markets are looking very poor from a technical standpoint, right? And they're hitting their all-time highs. They're the ones at risk of breakout. So the check has been passed to those countries to deal with. As we said, in a lot of these, we're going to come to find out we're servicing this IRGC regime. Um, and maybe they can say, oh, it just got past our regulations, whatever. But the point is they didn't go in and root it out, right? Um, so I think the final takeaway here I want to leave this week, this could play out either way. Like nothing is written in stone in terms of how things play out in war, right? This could go multiple ways, but expectations, if this goes the route for what's been agreed upon, what I think it looks like has been agreed upon for the end game between the Gulf Coast countries, the U.S. and China. I think that what does the U.S. have to gain here? Expect this U.S. kind of sovereigntist coalition to pick up a choke point territory, something like Strait of Gibraltar, Singapore, Hong Kong, et cetera, that these European powers picked up for multiple occasions over the last the back half of the second millennia, right? Post
Yeah.
AD. Um, that will give it a nexus of control both for the physical and financial movement of goods and capital through this key choke point. And if this completes this way, um, this could last hundreds of years, right? The key thing is who are your partners in the region? It's the stable countries, nation states, et cetera. I mean, a lot of them are monarchies, right? In the Gulf Coast. And then um, kind of a steady state agreement with China. It gets to build out economic infrastructure and connect. We talked about revitalizing the land-based Silk Roads, right? We talked about that a lot in our episodes. U.S. will acknowledge, yes, China, you're good to do that. And you see Iran occupied not by a power such as the European powers of UK or Russia, which both of those two say you can't, it is not acceptable for either one of those from the other side to uh, hold that ground, right? Um, and so the steady state that looks like something that works for all parties is GCC, equity ownership, China infrastructure ownership and development, and then US financial ownership of the choke point, and then hopefully the goal is this the U.S. capital base doesn't operate this the same way that the legacy colonialists,
Right.
operators did the same way for 300 years, 400 years, that everybody wants to see that go away and we move on to the next model. So that's the big takeaway here. That's what's at stake. This is huge. And I think we can all agree the media should be held to a higher account to do a better job informing people about this. But if you haven't learned it at this point, that's not their job. Their job is to push narratives. So I guess at the very least, hopefully this gives some clarity for the talking heads, the podcasters out there, all that, to get a bigger or a better understanding of what's actually going on here.
Thanks for that, Matt. And with that, I think that concludes our episode for the week. As always, please like, subscribe, comment on X, on YouTube, Substack. Our podcast, I believe, at this point should be syndicated everywhere as well, wherever you get your podcast from. So again, thanks for watching. See you all next week.
Yep. Hey, last thing, I'll be at Cornerstone in Calgary heading
Right.
out tomorrow. So if you're at Cornerstone for the Sean Newman conference, there should be, I've heard 700 people there, but yeah, come say hi. I'd love to meet you. And looking forward to having a great time up in Calgary.
Hopefully get to shake some hands of people in real life. That'll be really nice to be able to see them.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.